All right, welcome back. We're taking a look at question 4 from the 2014 mock exam. So a basketball coach wanted to know if the attendance at home games is related to the number of points his team scores. A simple linear regression analysis was performed and the partial computer output is given below. So a couple things here is r squared is 0.25. We could also write that as r squared equals 0.025 if you wanted to write it as a proportion. R squared adjusted is nothing that should concern you. This is not a topic that's covered on the AP exam. S, that's the average size of the residuals, roughly 12. And then the degrees of freedom is 15. So that's another useful piece of information. The sum of squares stuff here, this I don't think you really need to know for the AP exam. It's this bottom output here. Has your intercept and slope of the regression line. Also has some test statistics and some p-values over here. All right, so let's run through each of these 5 choices one at a time and figure out which one's true and which ones are false. Okay. So A says that the p-value for the slope, so that would be this number right there, is greater than 0.05. Okay, yes, it's true that it's greater than 0.05. So that means that there is a strong correlation between attendance at home games and points scored. Okay. Well, actually, we would need a small p-value in order to make that conclusion, okay, not a large p-value. Okay, so that one is going to be false. Okay. B, the critical value for a 95% confidence interval for the slope of the least squares regression line is t equals negative 0.618. So what they're looking at is that value right there. So that value is not the critical value, it's actually the test statistic. Okay, so that makes B false as well. Okay. C says the correlation coefficient for attendance at home games and points scored is approximately negative 0.16. So that, let's see, the correlation coefficient is just the fancy name for R. And so since we know R squared, we can just take the square root and that'll lead us to R. But we have to keep in mind that the direction of the relationship is negative. Okay. So the reason why I know that the direction is negative is because the slope here is negative. Okay. So that tells me that as I look at attendance, it doesn't want to let me click here. Let's try to figure this out. There we go. Attendance versus points scored, sorry. Right. This is going to have a negative direction, a negative slope to it. So the correlation would also be negative. Okay. All right, so let's do some quick calculations. So we know that r squared is 0.025, and then we would take the square root of both sides, and r would equal, I'm going to do the calculation off screen here, 0.1115, 16 about. Okay. 0.16. Okay. But anytime you do like a square root calculation on a calculator, it's always going to give you a positive answer, right? But we know that, in Algebra 2, we learned that there's positive and negative square roots. And since here we know that the direction of the relationship is negative, we know that the correlation would also be negative as well. Okay. All right, so it looks like C is the correct answer. Okay. Now let's just take a moment to look at the remaining 2 choices. D says approximately 4% of the variation in points scored can be explained by using attendance at home games to predict the number of points scored. So what they're using there is they're using the r squared adjusted value, which is incorrect. You want to just use the r squared value. So had they just written 2.5% there, then it would have been correct. Let's see if it's going to let me click 2.5%. Okay, so that would make statement D correct. But as it's written now, it is incorrect. Okay. E says the slope, which remember that's negative, indicates that as the number of people at the home games increases, so do the number of points scored. Okay, the relationship is the exact opposite. As attendance increases, the points scored is actually decreasing, right, according to the equation.